Good evening, everybody. Okay, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
This is Jerona Rotich. I am blessed to serve as your president. And with us tonight, we have our Vice President, Dr. Patrick Mose. Dr. Patrick Mose, can you wave? Can we see your face, wherever you are?
Progress.
Dr. Mose?
Hello. Yeah, this is Patrick. Yeah, this is Patrick Mose.
Okay,
I'm
good.
always driving. I'm driving, but I'll be home soon. In a few minutes, I'll be home.
Okay, good. Okay, that is our Vice President. We have our Secretary. I don't think I see her here. Janet, are you here yet? I do not see Janet. Treasurer Penina, Professor Penina Kamina is in Kenya, so she may be joining us later. But again,
Good afternoon.
Who?
I'm here.
Oh, she's here. Good. I didn't see. Okay, yes. Go ahead and introduce and say hi. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Janet Mbahazaneski, Secretary Kesa. Karibuni.
Okay, so she's the one who's been sending you all the great emails. So, yep, that's Janet. Our treasurer is in Kenya. She's doing a Fulbright at Strathmore University. So she may be joining us later, but that is Professor Kamina. I see our founders are here. We are great founders. We have Professor Otiso. You all know our founders. Professor Otiso, I thought I saw you here. Prof, if you're there, just wave. I see Professor Faith Kamau. If you're here, just say hi.
I'll say hi, but I'll show my face later.
Okay.
When I'm more beautiful.
Okay, okay, good, okay. All right, Faith, I know you're in the house. You would not be here without our founding fathers and mothers. Faith.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello. And then we have our former officials who are here. I see Caroline Kamau, Carol Kamau, I see she's here.
Hello, everybody.
Yep, she has worked with us. Our current, I see Choti's here, Daktari.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, they worked with us. And I'll introduce the others as I see them come in. So again, thank you so much. Join us. This is Kesa. We try to do this monthly. We did it during COVID, but we were not able to continue because so much was going on, but I do welcome all of you. I want to remind you that our 14th annual conference is coming up. It will be in Dallas on September 9th through the 10th. You do not want to miss that conference, so please put in your abstract, register, pay your membership. We only charge $50. Other organizations is more than that. So please support us so we can run our affairs. We don't have a lot of money, so please join us by paying your membership or renewing your membership, submit an abstract and join us. I joined KESA 13 years ago and have never missed a conference. Actually, my first conference, I took a train because I was a graduate student. I took a train from Greensboro to DC. From DC, I took a train to Bowling Green and have never missed a conference since then. So welcome. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our moderator for tonight, and that is none other than Professor Eric Otenyo, who's also one of our founders. So I was waiting to introduce Eric, one of our founding leaders. He served as a regional rep for a long, long time, and he's such a blessing. So welcome, Eric. I'm going to hand over the program to you so you can introduce our great panelists.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, my name is Eric Otenyo, and I am at Northern Arizona University. It's my great privilege and honor to welcome you all to this panel discussion. And we are honored to have two great scholars from Kenya. We have Dr. Monda David, who is a very prolific speaker. He's appeared in so many discussions globally, really, in all the media, Voice of America and other places. And so welcome, Dr. Monda. And then we also have Dr. Bonfas Owinga, also a professor in Clark Atlantic I was expecting the president to actually introduce all of you. But I know that Bonfas is also a very active scholar and one of the leading minds in African politics. It's a real privilege to have two great panelists. My job is going to be pretty simple, just to facilitate the discussions. And I know that we all have a stake in the elections going on in our home country, and we can spend the whole night actually talking about politics. So we will be very mindful of the time. I will serve as the rabble rouser, the timekeeper, and also a multitasker. I would like to, at this point, ask all of us to sort of mute our systems so that we don't interrupt when the discussions are going on. We will have the panelists make some introductory comments around the broad themes that we have here, which is the Kenya 2022 elections, presidential candidates, issues, and opportunities for the diaspora. How we're going to proceed is that I will give the two panelists about 5 minutes each to start us off by allowing them to reflect on what the meaning of these elections are at this point in time. And then after that, I will then raise a few questions which will organize the conversation. I intend this to be more of a conversation among ourselves and not assume that we're all political scientists, and so we will talk our political science jargon. We're not going to do that because this is something that affects all of us, and we are all very literate on what's going on in our country. So I will have Professor Bonfas Owinga start by just giving us a reflection of how we got here and to reflect on the importance of the 2022 elections. And then we'll call on Dr. Monda to do the same. We will have, towards the end of the session, an open forum for us to air our views and share thoughts, and also ask the panelists questions. So if we are all agreed.
Can you, I do apologize. Since I did not introduce them and introduce you, can you give them a few minutes to introduce themselves? And then can you also tell us who you, I think I assumed everybody knows who they are. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and then also give them a few minutes to introduce themselves before they get into the topic?
Yeah, sure. I actually had done the shortcut and Googled everyone so that I would do that, but then I found that that's not the best way to to introduce people, and so we'll go by what the president has suggested. So whoever wants to go first could do that.
Okay, so I'll go first. So thank you so much. So first of all, I just want to thank KESA for organizing this discussion. I think it's timely and it's important that we engage with issues and processes that are going back in our country, Kenya. And so I'm really honored to be here as one of the panelists, and thank you so much. So my name is Dr. Bonfas Owinga. I'm an assistant professor at Clark Atlanta University in the political science department. So my areas of expertise are comparative politics, African politics, and international relations. I also teach African diaspora. And so I also do research in the same area that I've just mentioned. And so I'm really grateful that we can engage in discussing Kenyan politics.
Nami kwa upande wangu, dada mwenyekiti, ukinikubali, nitaongea kwa ufupi kwa Kiswahili kutangulia. Mimi niko hapa New York, Profesa David Onserio wa Monda, na kwa kweli niko sawa kama sahani na kahawa. Nimefurahia sana kujumuika nanyi. Mimi kwa leo ningependa kuweza angalau kuhabarishana nanyi kwa masuala nyeti. Suala la kwanza ni hili jambo la urais. Suala la pili ni hizi changamoto za kisiasa, za kiuchumi na za kikatiba ambazo zinatuzonga kama taifa. Na nitatafakari kwa njia mbili. Nitakuwa nikipiga darubini uchaguzi wa 1113 na pia nitaipigia darubini uchaguzi huu ambao ujao wa 2022. Nitakuwa nikidokeza nafsi ya wanadiaspora angalau ni gani, na nimeweza kudokeza miundombinu tofauti mle ndani, na nuia ya kwamba wengi wenu mtachangia kwa masuala hayo. Nimedokeza kwenye nafsi ya kidiplomasia, nimedokeza kwa nafsi ya kiuchumi, na pia nimedokeza kwa nafsi yetu ya kihistoria. Lakini nitaweza kuanza kwa falsafa ya kihistoria, alafu nijumuishe masuala ya kisiasa, masuala ya kikatiba na masuala ya kiuchumi kwa ufupi. Mimi ni profesa wa masuala ya uhusiano wa kimataifa na siasa hapa New York, chuo kikuu cha New York, na nimeshukuru sana kuweza kupata nafasi hii kuchangia kwa mada hii, dada mwenyekiti na bwana mwenyekiti Eric Otenyo. Asante.
Asante sana ndugu Monda. So we will
sold out over COVID period, and now they are Renaissance Dallas Hotel.
Thank you. So let's begin this conversation by allowing our panelists to give us a reflection on how we got here and why this 2022 election is important. There has been a lot of media conversation around the, for lack of a better term, the nothingless, like issueless election. And I would like the panelists to reflect on that as well. Is this a turning point? Is this a make or break election, as Professor Makau has just written in the Daily Nation? What are your reflections on the 2022 elections? So let's start with Bonfas.
Okay, first of all, I must disagree with that view that this election is issueless, or the nothingness election. I think elections do matter, and I think this election is important for Kenyans. So first of all, I just want to look back to the political development that got us to this place. So first of all, I would say that our political development it's a mixed bag, There are things or areas that we've done well, and there are areas that we have not done well. So the area that we've done well, for example, starts with the promulgation of the Constitution in 2010, the new Constitution that changed the political scenario and brought in devolution and many other laws that I think are important in our political development. The second thing that I think goes well for us is the court. We do have a very assertive court that has proven that they are independent and they can make decisions without executive influence. And so I think that's something that goes well for us. We also have the development of political parties, and now this new law that ensures that coalitions can work and build themselves to contest election, I think is a good thing for the country. Now, the areas that I think we have not done well, I think the first one is electoral integrity. I think our electoral commission needs a lot of strengthening. The history of electoral commission in Kenya has not been that good. And the last election was nullified and we had to add a repeat election. And so I think, and the electoral commission, I think, have not done enough work to build confidence with the people of Kenya so that people can have faith in the electoral process. The second area that I think we are not doing so well is the issue of violence in elections. I think we've created a pattern of violence in every election that does not augur well for economy, neither does it augur well for transition in government. And then the last thing that we're not doing well, or last area, is the development of civil society. I think our civil society has moved from being strong to almost being extremely weak in terms of holding the government accountable, but also holding politicians accountable. And so I think our development is, political development is very mixed. But how did we get here? So I would say that the backdrop to these elections is 2017 elections. It's important for these elections, and that is where we started with what someone would call elite realignment. So the election in 2017 was held, and then it was nullified by the Supreme Court. You know that, you all know that. And then we had a repeat election, which was boycotted by the opposition or by the other party, the NASA at that time. So then what happened is there was a standoff after the repeat elections. Yeah. And the standoff continued for quite some time until we had what is called the handshake. Yeah. And the handshake was the coming together of Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga and President Uhuru Kenyatta, which then birthed what we call the BBI, yeah, which was coming from the 9-point agenda. And then finally, it changed into a political process where the president now supports the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. And so that was part of the elite realignment that now defined this election. But I think this election is very important. I think every election is important for several reasons. Yeah? Elections are not just held to change leadership, but elections are also held to advance democracy. Yeah? Elections do lead to voter efficacy, yeah? Generate the feeling of accountability, and that lead to continuation of people participating in the elections. Elections also help in transition of government, yeah? From changing one government to the next. We use election as an instrument to do that. But I also think that elections also lead to elite bargaining, elite realignment, elite recycling, and that is important. I just read 2 weeks ago in our newspapers when one was arguing that elite cohesion actually lead to political stability. Yeah, and so I think elections are not issueless. I don't agree with that thesis. And I think this election is very important, as part of what Makao Mutua says, is an election that changes the political scene, but also the third election using the new constitution that was promulgated in 2010. And so I don't think it's a useless election. I think it's a very important election for Kenyans, election that is also defined by the economy, the debt burden and the cost of living that Kenyans are now feeling. And so I think this election is a very important election in our lives. It's very consequential in my view.
Thank you, Bonfas. Let's hear from David.
So Eric, I will continue in English. And if you don't mind, Eric, if I could I share my screen? I just put a little package together, you know, to sort of encapsulate my my ideas. So if you could allow me to share my screen. Just let me know when that's possible.
You should, you're a co-host now, so you should be able to do that.
Okay, great. So let me get here. Okay. All right. So I put together a quick package to sort of get my ideas on this very important topic. I hope everybody can see the screen. There should be a flag there with a beautiful Maasai woman. You know, Eric, can you see that? Everybody?
Yes, I can.
Good. All right. So you know, in terms of approaching this topic, right, the Kenyan politics is really broad, and you know, we speak all night as you know, as Eric had mentioned about a whole sort of gambit of Kenyan politics. But I really wanted to marinate this conversation in terms of my thinking on it, in terms of comparing two elections, right? So I want to compare 2022 with 2013. And why am I comparing these two elections in terms of thinking about the issue of political candidates, issues and opportunities for the diaspora? Because these two elections are unique in two facets. The two elections when we have an incumbent who's termed out, that is handing over power to an unknown entity. So in 2013, it was Kibaki who was termed out. He'd served his 2 terms and was handing over power to an unknown for the 2013 election. And now in 2022, we see a similar scenario where we have a termed out president in the form of Uhuru Kenyatta, and he's handing over power to an unknown. It could be William Ruto, it could be Raila Odinga, or it could be a third candidate. Unlikely, but it could also be a third candidate. And why is it important to sort of contextualize the two elections sort of in terms of trying to think about 2022? Principally because these are transitional elections, and transitional elections are really problematic because, you know, if you look at 2017, you had an incumbent in office. So a lot of the seats were already occupied in terms of the transition. It's historically extremely difficult, whether it's in Kenya or even the United States, to unseat an incumbent. So that's, you know, non-transitional elections are somewhat challenging in that regard, but transitional elections are even more challenging. So if we look at 2013 and 2022, these are particularly difficult because it's the incumbent's not gonna be in office, he's termed out, and it's extremely difficult in terms of, you know, who will take over power, right? The deck of cards is really mixed up. And I'd like to look at the issue of presidential candidates in two lights. The two main candidates, Raila Amolo Odinga and William Samoei Ruto, are extremely powerful in two frameworks. One in terms of the ethnicity, because these are what we'd call ethno-regional notables, right? They're the most powerful individuals from their respective regions that are able to aggregate a whole coalition of not only their co-ethnics, but a coalition of political interests around their ethnicity to eventually win elections. And the second issue in this transition is this question of elitism, right? Where we now have this narrative of dynasties versus hustlers. In other words, political princes versus political paupers, right? The people with huge family names versus the so-called nobodies. And just for further information, sort of in terms of framing the narrative, I'd like to draw on the late Ali Mazrui, who talked about our African heritage, our triple heritage, our Africanity, Islam, and Christianity. In Kenya, we're really very mixed up because we have a lot of very challenged and conflicted heritages, right? How many of us, for example, can actually pray in our mother tongue? How many of us can actually write in our mother tongue and speak in our mother tongue? Particularly those of us who are from two ethnic groups, right? How many of our people actually know our ethnic history, our clan's history? That brings me to the writing of Mahmoud Mamdani. Why is Mahmoud Mamdani important? He's an author from Uganda, lived in Kenya for many years, but talks about this question of the citizen versus the state. And it's a challenge Eric and Bonfas said we were talking about earlier, right? The need for civic education. Because in Africa, Eric, our people we've lost our civic ethos. We believe elites have a right to rule over us. And a lot of our people don't understand that the power is actually with the people. It's not with the elites. And then further thinking about a broader narrative, and I'm just gonna breeze over these, right? The development of the state in Africa is very different. We are a collection of ethnic nations that were put together by the British in the context of Kenya that really didn't want to be together. But because of British imperialism, Her Majesty decided this would be Kenya, and then our neighbors would be Ethiopia, would be Uganda, and our other neighbors would be Tanzania, for example. And then also thinking more broadly about war making and state making. We've not gone through the process, Professor Eric, Professor Bonfas, around war making and state making. If you look at European state making, the Germans obliterated smaller tribes and you created Germany. The English consumed the Welsh, consumed the Scottish, consumed the Irish, and you had the United Kingdom, right? We've not really had that process of state making in Africa. And this really creates issues when we come to elections. I'd like to refer to the other questions of the rentier state, particularly in Kenya's context, Chairman Eric. We have a big issue in 2022 around all this oil we found in Turkana. If you look at some of Yates' writings on the rentier state, right? Oil dependency and neocolonialism, how will all these billions of dollars we have in oil in Turkana actually benefit Kenya, right? How will that really benefit Kenya? These are issues I hope we'll marinate about and talk more about. And then thinking about Olson's idea of the roving state, right? And the stationary bandit versus the roving bandit, right? The idea of the state actually being a provider of public goods versus the state being extractive. Will a Ruto administration be any different from the previous administrations, or will it be just a change of guard where the kings or the oppressors are different, but the extraction is still the same and exploitation is still the same? Will a Raila administration be any different? And then hopefully thinking about this challenge around transactional versus transformational leadership. I really think this is a major issue we need to think about in terms of how we frame elections in Kenya. Next, I want to think specifically about the 2013 election, and then I'll compare it with the 2020 election in terms of how we are understanding the framing of these two transitional elections. 2013 was a transitional election, but the difference with 2022 and 2013, in my estimation, is 2013 was about geopolitical tensions, which resulted from the International Criminal Court, an external hand creating a ruckus, which was very consequential in terms of how Kenyans voted, right? So you had Mount Kenya and Rift Valley, which aggregated around our man is being persecuted, right? Our Ruto is being persecuted. Our Uhuru is being persecuted. Our ethnic nation is being persecuted. We have to vote for our person to win. And why is that important in terms of how we understand 2022? Because 2013 was an election of political expediency, a co-presidency established, created around the consequence of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. In other words, what I'm really saying here is William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta didn't love each other in 2013, and we can see the consequences of that in 2022, right? But it was a marriage of convenience. They had to get together to save themselves from The Hague and to remain in power and get that insulation. The difference then with 2013 and 2022 here, whereas 2013 was about this geopolitical influence of the ICC on the state of Kenya, we now see 2022, in my view, as a temporal coalition created to frustrate an internal factor, which is William Samoei Ruto. It was tried through the BBI, it failed. But we do see very critical idiosyncratic tensions between Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, which were under the carpet and exploded towards the end of the Uhuru term, because William Ruto was not needed anymore. Therefore, he was expendable, and we had the handshake. Let's then think about issues.
David, we'll come to that. we'll come to the issues. Let's focus more now on the presidential candidates themselves.
Okay.
This is this is an important point in the sense that there is enormous concern about the quality of the people who have assumed the leadership of the parties that are contesting in the election, the current election. More specifically, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we have more than 85 political parties in Kenya. And technically, if this was a party system, then we would have 85 candidates. But we've now narrowed ourselves to what the popular media and what you're hinting at a two-man race. Basically, William, Dr. Ruto and Mzee Odinga. Now, my question to the panelists is, the two candidates that are front runners, so to speak, how prepared are they to take over the leadership of a country like Kenya? And what is it in their background that is concerning to you as scholars? And also, if we use some of the tools that we have in political science, like psychoanalyzing people, which is something that has been popularized, particularly here in the US Academy, and sometimes with faulty analysis. Is there anything that is a red flag in the candidates that we have? So let's hear from Bonfas and then David, and each of you have 2 minutes.
Okay, first of all, thank you for that question. I think what I would say about the candidates, first I would say both of them are credible candidates. I think they are prepared to be presidential candidates, but also to be president. So I think they are credible candidates. So I would just talk a little bit about William Ruto. So you guys know that William Ruto is the current deputy president. He entered politics in 1997 as Eldoret North Member of Parliament. He has been ministers in various ministries, including agriculture and higher education. He's been the deputy president for the last 9 years. This is the 10th year that he's been the deputy president. So I think he has enough political experience to be president. I think William Ruto, if you read the UDA website, they describe the party as a center-right, yeah. But if you look at the political campaigns that he has waged since 2018, he has appeared more like a populist, yeah, an outsider, somebody who is outside the government that is in solidarity with the poor and the working class and creating this hostile nation narrative, yeah. This is despite his elite status and substantial wealth, yeah. And so I think he wants to cast himself as someone who is a populist, someone who cares about Mama Mboga and the hostile nation. And I think the idea that he created this bottom-up argument contributed, I think, in a positive way to the discussion of politics in the country, where we are focused more on economic issues and gradually somehow moved out of discussion of ethnicity in the politics. I would also want to say that he has also brought into the discussion this class-based context. You know, Dr. Monda talked about the dynasties and the other group that is now very popular in terms of political discussion in the country. Now, for Raila Odinga, I think Raila Odinga is going for the presidency for the 5th time. Yeah, he may be fifth time lucky this time. But Raila Odinga cast himself as a reformer, and I think he has been that kind of character, being part of the second liberation in the 1990s that ousted President Moi from power. And then he also was part of the NAC in 2002 he was a champion of the new constitution and devolution, the constitution that was passed in 2010. And I think that reformist tag still goes on well with him. He has cast his presidential campaign as that of national unity, that he wants to bring the communities together in Azimio la Umoja. And I think that's a theme that you saw also Professor Makao Mutua writing in his article. Raila Odinga sees himself as a center-left candidate, and I think he has stuck to that in terms of his campaign with issues like Baba Care, issues like emphasizing devolution and social justice. And so the two candidates are very contrasting. You know, they come from different backgrounds. William Ruto comes from Kanu and Raila comes from the opposition. And so I think they're very contrasting candidates that I think give Kenyans a very clear choice on where they want to cast their votes. And so that is what I would say about this candidate. Professor Monda can do the psychoanalysis and tell us what he thinks about that.
Yeah.
Professor Monda, yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think in terms of the, I mean, I see it a little different. I think as much as the candidates are trying to, you know, create this binary narrative of a difference between them, I think that they're very much both elites, right? One may have been a biological elite by virtue of a family name. The other might have been becomes an elite by virtue of hustling through Kanu and a range of associations in the political space. I really see very little difference around them. They're both ruthless. They both have very interesting similarities. They're both ruthless players, right? Ask Jimmy Wanjigi about trying to get the nomination in for the ODM ticket, you know, from Raila Odinga and see where that ends up, right? Think about the Men in Black from previous histories of nominations within the ODM party. And even try to get a ticket to get a nomination as a candidate from Diaspora in ODM and see what will happen, whether it's a very democratic process. These are very ruthless players. And William Ruto has really, you know, not only proved himself to be very ruthless, but very much like Raila Odinga, he's also proved himself in terms of a psychoanalysis to be very resilient, right? And he's morphed himself from Kanu, which became defunct, very unpopular in 2002. You lose that election, but he remakes himself to join the Odinga, you know, organization, join the Odinga bandwagon, 2007, and then to transform himself and become an ally with Uhuru Kenyatta in, you know, in 2013. But I must also say, both candidates rely heavily on ethnicity in terms of mobilization, right? Ethnic mobilization. They're elites that still rely very much on ethnic mobilization. And I don't necessarily see that, you know, Professor Otenyo as a negative, because, you know, there's a lot of literature on this sort of in political science that, you know, Africa is not just about corruptocracies, right? And terrorocracies, right? And failed states, so to speak. Right, Africa is a very diverse basket of countries. You know, think about the kind of intellectual discussions that we had around not only the BBI, you know, today, but also around, you know, very complex issues of constitutionalism. Right, these are very powerful, you know, very powerful, you know, issues that we should think about. So I really see them a lot more similar than I see them as different. And I think this ties in very well with how issues are constructed in Kenyan politics. It's not that the issues are not there. We know the issues: corruption, unemployment, political violence, right? Lack of gender parity. The issues are there. But the problem, Professor Otenyo, becomes when we have ethnic mobilization around these coalitions, then we put the cart before the horse. Whereas in more mature democracies, you have individuals framing issues around ideologies and then creating coalitions to deal with those issues through ideological frameworks. In Kenya, it's the opposite. We form coalitions and then we create, we create straw men in the issues that the political elites know they'll never really solve, because once they get into power, they've accessed the state feeding trough. So I think this is one of the challenges moving forward, and I'd be interested to see what the rest of our group thinks about this. How do we actually hold these candidates' feet to the fire? Number one. Number two, why does it have to be a two-horse race? Where is it within the youth, within the polity, to say, we want Otenyo to run for president, and we're gonna vote for Otenyo as a mwananchi who's gonna transform Kenya? Where is it that we can say we're gonna vote for Bonfas or Teresa or Philip as a mwananchi who can really deliver? I think this is the challenge we're facing, because for so long, political elites, the media has really spun this narrative that you can only be, unless you're from the right families, went to the right schools, have the right kind of money, that you can actually, become president, when that really shouldn't be the case. How do we do that? How do we sort of re-entrench civic education to say that anybody can be president in Kenya? You could be a Borana and still have a dream of being president and transform the country. Why is it every time we keep recycling the same faces on and on and on? Because the issues never get dealt with, because we're not framing them through an issue perspective. We mobilize ethnically. Once people get into power, the issues are forgotten.
David, we'll come to that towards the end of the session to see if we can think through some of the recommendations that could help Kenya. I want to pose this question to you, because you seem to disagree with Bonfas. Bonfas suggests that Ruto has moved the political discourse from a non-issue to a class issue, and you're disagreeing that these are birds of the same feather. Yeah, so can I hear from Bonfas?
First of all, I disagree with Professor Monda that these candidates are just the same. I think if you look at Raila's political history, if you compare with William Ruto, they are totally different. Raila Odinga has always been in the opposition. He fought for the second liberation. He was jailed, detained twice or thrice because of fighting for political space in Kenya. William Ruto has never been in the opposition. Yeah, for a very short time in 2007. These candidates are very different. In 2005, they were on the different side of the constitutional referendum. In 2010, they were on the different side again on the constitutional referendum, with Raila supporting the new constitution and William Ruto opposing the new constitution. And so they have very different credentials, they have very different histories. And I think that is a very stark difference in these elections. William Ruto had always been the Moi government, yeah, until Moi left power. Raila Odinga had always been the opposition for all this time. And so I think these candidates have very different histories and very different in terms of what they present to Kenyans. And so, and as I said, as they campaign, you also see that difference. But I think what William Ruto is good at is that he is good at presenting himself as this candidate for the common man, the hustler nation. Yeah. Although he described the political party as center-right, but he's all going almost to the left of Raila Odinga, who described himself as the center-left. Yeah. So I don't see these candidates as just the same as Professor Monda is saying.
So and Professor Otenyo, if I may jump in, and I really see both candidates as transactional, and let me explain why. Firstly, I don't really believe we have classes in Kenya as we have classes in sort of the traditional sort of North American or European context, right? This idea of a huge bourgeoisie, middle class, an elite, and then, you know, a poor, and then sort of a social safety net that takes care of the 5% of the poorest of the poor. We just don't have that in Kenya, right? In terms of a clear class-based sort of polity, right? It's a few super wealthy, Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga, and William Ruto in that half of 1%, and then 98% of the population as very, very poor, as a struggling poor. And you can then disaggregate that, right? Because if the majority, 72% of our population lives in rural areas, half of that 72% lives in abject poverty, right? This notion of class-based ideology notions is really moot, in my view. I think secondly, both of these leaders are very transactional, right? So Bonfas talks about Raila being, oh, this guy who was detained and who suffered in jail. Yes, this is true. So if being a good leader was all about being detained, Raila would take the gold cup 1,000 times, right? He would take the gold medal hands down. But being detained doesn't necessarily make you a good leader. It just means you got detained. In other words, if the 1982 coup had succeeded and Raila had been installed as president, are we sure that he would not have detained Moi or Kibaki or any opponents, that, you know, he wouldn't have done what previous regimes had done? I guess that's number one. Number two, you know, Bonfas frames Raila Odinga as this messianic figure. He suffered, he went to jail. Excuse me, if you get into the political game, which is repressive, you gotta be ready to take a hit. You play rugby. I broke my foot playing rugby. It comes with the right?
I think my point.
So I think if we're gonna frame it that suffering is the context from which you become a leader and you're great and you're different in that context, Raila would win it. But my framing here is they're both very opportunistic. Raila has joined KANU, completely trashed his ideals to get power. He did it.
I think my point is,
Raila has worked with every sort of candidate, whether it's Ruto or Moi or Kibaki, to win power. Raila's parties have never been democratic.
My point is that these two candidates are very different.
I think they're both very transactional leaders, and they're also very ruthless. And if you're gonna say, oh, Raila went to jail, therefore he's this martyr and messianic figure, I just don't see that, because I see a very dictatorial candidate, not only from his party positions, but also from how his family is now aligning for all these positions in 2022. They're ready for the gravy train.
Okay, thank you both. So here's my take. I think we're moving along well. I want us to focus now more on, for lack of a better word, the ugliness of the 2022 election, your reflections, because it appears as if maybe because of the social media influence, we're having this political contest that is becoming quite dirty. People are calling mothers names, people are calling each other thieves, others are being called Arap Mashamba or mad people. Can you comment on just the nuts and bolts of the way the political process is turning out? And what are the dangers in your reading of politics, of this kind of politics? And so let's start with Bonfas.
I think, first of all, I just want to respond to Professor Monda. I want to say, first of all, that these candidates have so many, they're very different histories. I was not tying that to leadership, but I was saying that they're very different personalities and what they've gone through politically. So they're very different in my view. The second thing I want to say is about what you comment about classes. I think, Professor, you should read Check Anta Diop about class struggle in Africa and see that there are classes in Africa. Africa are not classless societies. That is my point. Now, to comment on the speech, or what Professor Otenyo is calling, what unraveled that has become to, hate speech, yeah, if I can call it that way. I think that the problem that we have in Kenya is that we do not have institutions that are strong enough to deal with this kind of issues, yeah. So we have the national cohesion that has been very, how would I describe it, has not taken these cases seriously. People go to national cohesion when they say this kind of things, 2 or 3 days, they're let go. And I think that has encouraged more politicians to talk about this kind of issues. I think the danger is that this feeds into the violence that rock our elections every now and then. When you start having sentiments describing whole communities, for example, what Moses Kuria was talking about, targeting a whole community in terms of what they are or what they mean, I think that is hate speech, and I think should be dealt with in a very strong way. I also saw one of the person in the US talking about President Kenyatta's mother and all that he said. I think that kind of hate speech should be dealt with in a very strong way to send a message that this is not, it's not going to be tolerated. But it also goes to IEBC. I think IEBC has been a weak institution that really needs some strengthening if we are to have integrity in elections. I think IEBC has not had a good history of holding credible and fair elections. And this has always led to this violence after every elections, affecting our economy, affecting national unity. And so I think we need to strengthen IEBC, but we also need to strengthen the National Cohesion Commission so that they can deal with this kind of issues in a very final way, so that they send a message that this kind of speech will not be accepted during elections.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. So I guess we fair people can disagree on on issues in terms of perspectives. I am confidently convinced that Africa may have classes, but not in a classical context. If we have a middle class, it's very small, which is part of the problem of our politics. In mature democracies, the middle class is large enough so that individuals can actually hold governments accountable. So here we're thinking people like Perzolski, right? In terms of the bourgeois and in terms of state formation. Thinking about people like Gianfranco Poggi around the developmental state versus the extractive state. Many of our states in Africa, they're extractive. Think about Mobutu's Zaire. Think about even Kenya, right? We have all this investment, but it's really very neo-colonial. And let me give an example for a minute, Professor Otenyo. Think about, for example, in Kisii, right? How much are our farmers in Kisii getting paid for tea? Or coffee farmers in Kiambu, right? The structures that go back to the colonial state that keep our people desperately poor. And those structures, because most of the people are rural, right? The independence governments didn't particularly care about them because they understand the unrest will come from urban areas, from Nairobi, from Mombasa, from Kisumu, not from some far village in the Rift Valley or in Northeastern. So there's really a very fundamental structural problem around not only our political economy, but then how our political economy that's post-colonial is still very reflective of the colonial state, right? That our governments don't pay our farmers, the majority of our rural poor, fair value for their labor, which then creates other social problems because poor people in Kisii, in Kericho, in Voi, then come to Nairobi, to urban centers to look for jobs, right? So the neo-colonial state has really been transformed. The leaders at the top, who are, again, in my view, very transactional, are not transformational to come up with new ideas, big ideas rather than big individuals. We're saturated with this idea that Ruto has to be president, Raila has to be president, but what will they fundamentally do to ensure that a tea farmer in Kericho is getting double what they're getting paid today? And if tea farming is not good in Kericho, if sugar farming has failed in Mumias, what's the alternative? What is the alternative? We really need to change the narrative. In terms of social media, I think this unfortunately is one of the challenges we have with social media, right? So our Kisi brother here, who was really calling, the first lady some really unprintable terms, did it because of of social media, right? Because of the informality of the social media. He can basically have his cell phone, chop out all these unspeakable terms, and that's the end of it, right? Would he have done the same thing if he was with a microphone in a public audience in front of an audience, right? Social media challenges. I'm not sure the NCIC actually has a mechanism to rein in some of these, Professor Otenyo, some of these really violent forms of speech. And why is that the case? Because if you look at some of the stuff that was being said about the first lady, this is a surrogate of a UDA operative. If you look at some of the stuff Babu Owinga was saying about the president and the elites, this was a surrogate of ODM. So even the political leaders themselves are very entrenched in a lot of this hate speech, right? Some of them using terms like madoadoa, right? We need to remove this madoadoa, from the polity. How then, Professor Otenyo, are you going to censure Raila Odinga without looking like you're favoring William Ruto? And then for William Ruto's supporter, how are you going to censure his supporter or censure William Ruto with the NCIC without then being accused of being partisan or favoring the other side? So I think this then goes back to the broader question of civic education and civility in terms of our national discourse, right? This is something that will take time, but we really need to think about how do you create norms where it becomes unacceptable to use, the genitalia of our women in very derogatory ways. And that's not a problem that's unique to Kenya. Our very own Donald Trump is quoted on record of using some very vulgar terms, and this is a 400-year democracy. So this is definitely a work in progress.
Yeah, thank you, David. I would like to draw your attention to Ken Chesoli's comment. He says here in the chat that if we go back to the 2013 election, Uhuru and Raila, threw words at each other, which also bordered on vulgarity, on incivility rather. And so what's happening now may just be an amplification of some ugliness on the part of the Kenyan elite. Now, having said that, I want to draw us back to the question of issues, David. And I will start with you again, in the sense that if you look at all these parties or leaders that we have, what are some of the issues that directly affect us who live in the diaspora? Because if you recall, Raila went to the UK, talked at Chatham House. Ruto came here and also went to the UK, made some promises about the diaspora. Now, Raila has been around much longer than Ruto, and I see him basically also as being a much older hand in Kenyan politics. There is a generational issue here as well. Mm-hmm. The fact that he was born before Kenya was Kenya, right? And Ruto was born after Kenya became independent. So there is a different view in terms of how they look at the diaspora. how they see people who live outside Kenya. Is there anything in this campaign season that speaks to a purposeful way of engaging the diaspora? And I'll begin with you, David, because you have talked about the importance of these meetings that these leaders have in foreign lands. I think you gave a lecture that I probably attended. And so I want to hear some of your comments on that. And then in 3 minutes, we have Bonfas also comment on the same issue.
Okay, can I share my screen again real quick? I have a quick, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right. Okay, so yeah, so again, I think a lot of the issues we have are really framed around elite bargaining, pacting, and coalition formation. In terms of the diaspora, and I speak to this, you know, in terms of the opportunities, but let me just quickly move to that, right? A lot of our issues, Professor Otenyo, you asked me about, are, you know, I really think our issues, you know, can really be encapsulated within the framework of how do we look at the issues that are there and what we need as diaspora and create opportunities. And I think I've spoken with the, our CASA president about very specifics of what we can do. So thinking, for example, around how do we create frameworks so that CASA members, diasporans, can go to Kenya and actually get paid and sponsored to support and use some of their knowledge and their pedagogical skills in terms of creating these frameworks. But Professor Otenyo, I think your point is really poignant, right? My thinking in terms of what the issues are and how can we really have agency is creating these strategic partnerships. And I did some research specifically in relation to this, right? So thinking about key committees in Parliament that can really address our issues as diasporans, whether it's voting issues, whether it's issues about collaboration between institutions of higher education, whether it's our issues about certification. So for example, how does a civil engineer from the US go and start to practice in Kenya, or a doctor or a lawyer, right? And how does someone from there, how are they able, for example, to come to City University of New York to our research facility and do a postdoc, right? With minimal challenges. And I identified some particular members of parliament, you know, that have been diasporans and have served on the Defense and International Relations Committee, you know, and I've listed some of these and I'd be glad to share. Some of the current members in terms of our issues, whether it's in terms of collaboration, whether it's in terms of voting rights, whether it's about creating these bills in Parliament to actually move our agenda forward. And then also more broadly, Professor Otenyo, around issues of sports diplomacy. We really need to start thinking about the challenges, but creating opportunities from a lot of these challenges, right? Sports diplomacy, we have specialists on this panel who study kinetic science, right? How do we create these collaborations and opportunities to marinate our greatness in sports in Kenya and transfer that to the United States? Issues around, you know, our marathons. How do we use marathons then to create value around how our people win every marathon? But this idea of creating value around our marathons and working with, you know, with our embassies. Think about sports drinks. Think about sports tourism. Think about promotions for, you know, our direct airline from New York to Nairobi. There's just so much we can do. But unfortunately, Professor Otenyo, when you reach out to our embassy, they will never respond, ever respond. It's so frustrating. Thinking lastly about how are the issues? Kenya needs to grow jobs. Kenya needs to to create itself as a premier market from all the other 54 countries on the continent. We have Lupita Nyong'o, who was seated right next to Will Smith at the Oscars. But where is the connection of using these assets? We had Barack Hussein Obama as a president of the United States. How do we then create these connections? And I think that's the next level of leadership that we need to aspire to. So beyond saying Azimio or Kenya Kwanza, what are the areas of confluence that these candidates can create to really generate value? And how can we as a diaspora contribute to that?
All right. Bonfas, thank you, David.
Yeah, okay, first of all, I just want to comment about public institutions. I don't think that we should look at public institutions as being unable to do stuff because they're going to be seen as partisan. The national cohesion is a public institution, and I think this institution should be strengthened so that it can handle these issues without this thing of, if it does this, it's this side, if it does this, it's this side. These are public institutions, and I don't think that kind of perception should be tied to this kind of institutions. When it comes to diaspora, I think the very first thing that we need to do is to organize ourselves. Yeah. If you organize yourself, you create power by the numbers that that organization can create through organization, so that our issues can have a voice. Yeah. But we also need to be proactive in terms of engaging these presidential candidates when they come to these areas. So for me, I think the first thing is, how do we organize a strong organization that can represent and voice our concerns to these presidential candidates? And then the second thing is, how do we engage these presidential candidates in a way that they take our issues seriously and not just say, and then they're going to do X, Y, Z, and they don't. But I think that also goes to the point of voting, yeah, which has been very, very gradual in terms of including the diaspora in the voting process. At least this time, the IEBC increased the number of countries by 6, including the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Canada, and many other countries. So I think what we need to do first is to fight for this right to vote and engage IEBC in ways that the diaspora can be able to vote. In the last opening for registration, the diaspora only registered new voters, 3,000 voters only. Yeah, well, the diaspora, I think, is a large community of Kenyans that live abroad. So I think that we need to really be specific on how we want to move forward. If we want our issues to be taken seriously by the Kenyan government or any government that comes into power, through voting, through fighting for our right to vote, through organizing, through engaging the candidates, but also through making sure that we talk about what we want. Yeah, what kind of things do we want the government to do for us? Investment opportunities, dealing with this issue of dual citizenship. I heard Dr. Otenyo, I saw Dr. Otenyo raise it about Miguna, and how this issue can be streamlined. So I think we need to identify our issues that we want to be addressed by these presidential candidates, but also have the numbers behind those issues, that this is the kind of power that the diaspora hold. Apart from remittances that we send, what about how we organize ourselves within the diaspora? So I think those are important issues that we should take care of.
So
yeah,
here's
Eric,
sure.
could I just add one point real quick? I think the other thing, the other thing that's really salient, that Bonfas mentioned that I think is important. Yes, diasporans can vote, but it's really underwhelming. And I put this in a piece in The Nation the other day. We can only vote, if you're outside Kenya, you can only vote for your president. You can't vote for your senator, you can't vote for an MCA, you can't vote for a women's rep, you can't vote for a governor, you can't vote for your county rep. This is very problematic. I think a second issue to what Bonfas mentioned, yes, the IEBC came here, but they were only here for 2 weeks. That's not fair. I mean, for me, I live 10 minutes from the embassy. That's not a problem. But what about someone who's in North Carolina? What about someone who's in Idaho? What about someone who's in Seattle, Washington? What about someone who's in Kansas? So I think this brings us, to the broader question, Eric, around, are we creating those allies in parliament? There are a lot of them who are even on the foreign Relations and Defense Committees who are students here. They know about diaspora. How do we make these connections so they can actually propose bills to engage and make meaningful change? Because for me, the IEBC's move coming out here to register was, quite frankly, it was a tourist. It was quite almost like a tourist tour for the commissioners. They didn't reach it. They didn't reach enough Kenyans. So if you can't reach enough Kenyans, why are you surprised when only 100 people register? When you neglect a majority of where most of the Kenyans are. They really need to come up with a better framing in terms of how they want to access Kenyans. Either we can do it online with your ID and passport, they can verify it and you can register online, or they really need to come up with another framing, because this idea of registering only in DC, LA, and New York is not fair. It's very unjust to a majority of the Kenyans who are out there. And then lastly, how do we, one of my visions in terms of diaspora engagement is really, Professor Otenyo, around how can we create this nexus, this triangle between academics, practitioners, right, civil society, and policymakers, the politicians, so that even when bills are being proposed on, say, IT, how many of our IT specialists in diaspora are getting engaged? If it's bills being proposed around dual citizenship and who can serve, why is it diasporans are being criminalized and cannot be appointed ambassadors or serve in the diplomatic corps simply because they have dual citizenship? Many a diaspora came here not because they wanted to, but they had to, right? Because of political issues, because of economics, they had to leave, right? It's not because they left Kenya because they wanted to, they were forced to. So I really think we need to reimagine how, Kenya really needs to think about how you reimagine your engagement with the diaspora. And I think that's one area where we're still failing.
Thank you, David.
Let me just comment. I think that starts with organization, yeah? So if we are not organized as diaspora, how do we engage? So the issue that Dr. Monda has raised, all those issues can only be addressed if we are organized in a way that we can respond to these politicians, in a way that we can submit our issues to these politicians, in a way that we can engage with parliament. We may have people there, but if we don't have this connection and nexus that we engage our issue, that we press for these issues. Look at the issue that everybody has to vote in DC. If you live in Texas, you take a plane all the way to go and cast one ballot and go back. So I think these issues can only be addressed if diaspora is organized and create these linkages with the government back home and the politicians in parliament, as Dr. Monda said. So for me, it's organization, it's organization, it's organization.
I would like to comment that from what the two panelists have alluded to is an indictment on the IEBC, whatever you call it, the election commission body. It seems like for the amount of money that they are given, we're not getting much benefit from the billions that is allocated to them. And I'll give a specific example with reference to the 2022 election. Usually, these types of commissions have the capability of preparing documents that educate the voters and say that here's what Dr. Ruto stands for in terms of diaspora policy, and here's what Raila Odinga stands for. And you can do this very easily by doing a content analysis of the speeches they've made over the years and the things they've said. We are operating from a situation where we don't have information to know exactly what the two candidates will offer us. Their speeches in Chatham House or even here in New York are inadequate. And if I'm hearing the two of you correctly, that this is part of this institutional weakness that we have. If you live in Alaska, you're just being told point blank that you're not going to vote, right? Because how do you pay $2,000 to fly to DC for a vote. It just looks like you're disenfranchised. So I would like now to welcome a few comments and questions from those who are present today. And I can read from Faith Maina. She says that, can you address the issue of opposition given the legacy of handshake might get entrenched? And then there was also another comment by Philip, Dr. Mutisia. He says, how do we combat impunity among ourselves and empower ourselves reflectively? The two panelists can take any of those questions.
Yes, I would take the issue of opposition in the process of handshake. So I think what most people have not understood with our system, that in a presidential system like ours, you really don't have the opposition as such. Yeah, the presidential system assumes that parliament is not divided into opposition and government side, and every legislator is able to hold the president accountable. Yeah. And so we really don't have opposition in the name of opposition. We don't have opposition leader in parliament, official opposition leader in parliament. What we have are legislators that discuss bills in parliament. And so the assumption in the presidential system is that every legislator is able to hold the president accountable. Yeah. And so even if there was a handshake, both Jubilee, ODM, ANC legislators were playing the role of oversight on the government, and they should have played that role properly, even with the handshake. How do we combat impunity? I think the first way that we can combat impunity is creating institutions, inclusive institutions that offer opportunity, that offer incentives to all Kenyans equally. I think what we have in Kenya today are extractive institutions that are very narrow and offer opportunities for the elites and those who can jump the queue. Yeah. And so I think one way is to create institutions. We need to focus on how do we create institutions that are inclusive, that serve the interests of Kenyans equally. But then we also have to balance that with distribution of power. And I think the devolution that has happened in Kenya should be strengthened so that the devolution can work for ordinary Kenyans in those counties, in those 47 counties. And I think the 2010 constitution was a very good thing in terms of distribution of resources across the country. And so for me, I think that is what we should focus on. How do we create inclusive institutions that offer incentives and opportunities equally to Kenyans? But also there's a problem that we have in Kenya in terms of enforcement of regulations. Yeah, we have laws, we have institutions, but I think we fail in terms of enforcing regulations. We don't enforce any regulation at all. Think about building regulations, think about traffic regulations. We hardly enforce these regulations. So I think we need to strengthen regulatory system in the country so that these laws don't just remain laws, but we make them reality. We breathe life into these laws so that Kenyans can benefit from all these laws that have been passed in parliament. So I think my view is that that's what we should focus on.
Yeah, and Professor Otenyo, in terms of my my comments on that, if I could just really quickly, speak about some of the visits that our candidates, whether it's Raila Odinga, have been making abroad or William Ruto, right? Let's, for example, look at Ruto's visit to the United States, right? It really epitomized a lack of understanding of the US political system. Because if I was to advise Ruto and Hussein Mohammed, his media person coming out here, it's just very basic lack of understanding. They really needed to have targeted the committees in Congress that deal with African issues and the leaders of those committees. And let me give you a couple of examples here. Senator Coons, who used to be a longtime co-senator from Delaware with our current president, he did a Fulbright in Kenya many years ago. So he has a deep and very passionate understanding with Kenya, very close association. Why wasn't anybody reaching out to him? Think about Linda Greenfield Thomas. Linda Greenfield Thomas used to be in the Kenya embassy in Nairobi. So this is the current permanent representative in the United Nations, right? So very strategic articulation of key legislators that can speak on African issues and issues related to Kenya. And in particular, I think what, for example, Ruto and Raila should have been doing when they came out here is thinking about this, the bilateral agreement, the free trade agreement, which we're trying to do with Trump, which has really been put on the back burner. These are big issues that we need to think about. I think to Faith's point, this is just a very poignant point. And which brings me back to my point of disagreement with Bonfas around the visionary leadership of Raila Odinga, right? This is a very transactional leader, because when it was politically convenient for him, he forgot about, the flawed election, and he forgot about the hundreds of young people that were shot in the head, that were brutalized fighting for his vote at the end of the 2017 election. And he just did a handshake because it's very transactional. It's about what can I get for me and how can I get to power now? This is a problem. I think if we're going to think about, transformative issues that Faith raises, I think the last 4 years have really been a wasted period, Professor Otenyo, because we didn't have an opposition. Why? Because ODM abrogated, forgot about its responsibility, because they were already looking at 2022. There was no check on the government. How much money was stolen and taken away because there was no opposition? This is a big problem because of the transactional nature of our leadership. It's not transformational. And then I think also in terms of, to Patrick's point about, the law needing to be put in place, I absolutely, second that, that point. And the laws being put in place will really be about how do we as a diaspora create alliances and key associations with those leaders in those committees in parliament to actually push for our issues. And I think, for the leadership of KESA, how we could frame this is to say, this is what we are proposing, and you as committee leader will benefit, because if this project comes through, you gain political mileage, because these are also political animals. How do we really frame our narratives and our agendas so that it's also mutually beneficial? It's a symbiotic relationship. And sort of thinking more broadly, to some of our founders, like Dr. Otiso, is there space for us to have a KESA branch in Canada and have other diaspora KESA, frameworks? Because remember, the diaspora is not just the US, right? So maybe a London chapter, a Dubai chapter, a Canada chapter, and then all these different chapters, I think working together really creates some traction, much bigger traction in terms of really targeting these key, key members of committees and really pushing our agenda, so that it's not always, yes, we are the largest constituency in North America, but I really think KESA has a place for some of those horror stories, the chapters when we have, I mean, we can do something about those people those ladies who are getting mistreated in the Middle East. Those are also diasporans.
Thank you, David. There are a couple of comments in the chat room there, which we should address. We're heading close towards having an open forum. One of the comments that is in the chat session, in the chat side, is the idea of state capture, and also the national debt that Kenya is currently facing. And I think these things are all linked to the lack of opposition that David has just brought about. The other one is a comment from our founding president. He's asking about he's commenting about Raila's abandonment of the role of opposition. Is this a contributory factor to the current crisis? And will that cost him the presidency? Now, the last part of Professor Tiso's question is leading me to the issue of forecasting, or what political scientists call polling. And I would like to hear from the two panelists. Whom do we trust here? This is not a rhetorical question that Atuoli posed, but a question of, do we trust these numerous, polls that are appearing all over the place? David or Bonfas, any of you can pick on that.
Okay, I think I'll I start by talking about the handshake. I don't think that one would look at handshake as opportunism. Yeah, I think statesmen do look at the situation that goes on in the country and they make decisions. And I think at that point, the country was on a standoff and people were dying. And I think the handshake was a kind of conflict solution process that brought the country together. So I don't see it as opportunity, because the country was burning, people were dying every day. And there was a standstill of what the country should move to. If you listen to what Uhuru Kenyatta shared by saying, how would I use the police on these people for 2 weeks or a month? And these are Kenyans too. So I think it reached a point where these leaders had to make hard decisions and to decide to work together. So that's my comment about that. A comment about visiting Diaspora, and especially commenting on William Ruto's visit. I think the visit was poorly organized, and I don't think it achieved much. But the second thing, I also think that William Ruto finds himself in a very hard place. You are the current sitting deputy president, and you go abroad and you have to criticize the government that you are the deputy president. I think it's a very difficult position for one to be in. And to say government is misusing money and you are the deputy president. To say that government is withdrawing money and paying to buy your position and you are the deputy president. So I think it's a very difficult position to be in. The best thing for me was for him to resign, and then from outside, you are able to critique or criticize the government that you're competing as a presidential candidate. Gives you that free leeway to do that. So let me comment on the state capture. Yeah. So I think when it comes to state capture, you could think about South Africa setting up this commission for state capture. We've always had cartels in the country. Yeah. Every sector, you find that there's a capture of that sector with all these cartels. And that still goes back to what I was talking about, creating institutions, inclusive institutions that are independent, that can drive the country forward in terms of development. We need to really focus on how do we make our institutions strong so that they can serve the country and not captured by these cartels that capture all institutions. When it comes to the economy, I think the Jubilee government is leaving the economy in a worse situation than they found it. Yeah. Today, our debt burden, we are paying 1 trillion Kenya shillings a year annually. Yeah, we only collect 1.6 trillion in ordinary revenue, and we are paying 1 trillion every year, and our budget is 3 trillion. It doesn't add up, meaning that every budget we have to borrow in order to make sure that our budget can be implemented. And so I think the situation of debt burden is an important issue that these candidates need to talk about and how they are going to deal with it. And again, I think William Ruto finds himself in a very difficult position. This is your deputy president, and you're talking about debt burden that you should be part of. And then you are saying how you are going to deal with it. Okay, then let me talk about the last question of Raila leaving the opposition and joining the government. Yeah. As I said, in a presidential system, the assumption is that all legislators play oversight role. There's no official leader of opposition. Raila was not even in parliament when he joined the handshake. And so in my view, I think that all legislators must be responsible for what has happened. Both Jubilee, and ODM, even ANC. Everyone in that parliament needed to play their oversight role as legislators. We have the executive, we have the judiciary, and then we have the legislature. All these are branches of government which should be independent to play their role. And so I don't think that the argument that Raila signed handshake and therefore position was killed. He was not even in parliament that time, he was outside parliament. And all these members of parliament needed to hold the government accountable, okay? When it comes to the last one, polling, yeah? Which one should we trust, yeah? So I think polling in Kenya is still developing, and some of the polls are trustworthy, some are not. But again, we must understand polls as a snapshot of a certain period. People change their minds. So if you do polls on a 5-day period, that's what the people are thinking on during those 5 days. So I think we should look at them as snapshots of people thinking at those different times. Which one do you trust? It's difficult because the polls are still developing in Kenya. We have InfoTrack, we have Radio Africa, we have all these polls. But I think they're important for political parties. Yeah, they're important for them to look inside the poll, look at methodology and look at other findings that can inform the way you campaign. It can inform the way you plan. It can inform the people you target. It can inform the issues that you put on top of your campaigns. And so the polling is still important in terms of sharing the issues and information with political parties so that they can use those as part of their strategy in terms of campaigns. Which one do you trust? I think that's a difficult question to say this is what I trust. You can look at the methodology and see, can I trust this poll? Can I not trust this poll? But I think the polling process is still developing in the country and they're getting stronger and stronger as I see it.
Thank you, Dr. Owinga.
Yeah, and Dr. Tiso, maybe I could add to that. Let me start with the polling. I think, you know, as Bonfas has mentioned, right? It all comes down to methodology. I mean, polls, even in mature democracies, right? Who thought in 2016 that Trump would win, right? Everybody wrote him off, and lo and behold, Trump was president, right? I think in Kenya in particular, we have serious issues with polling, and in terms of not only the methodology, but the sampling, and Professor Otenyo, in terms of the honesty of the people being polled. Because a lot of times, you know, people who are being polled will answer questions based on what they think you want to hear as the person asking the question, or what your ethnicity might be and who you're asking. So there's a lot of challenges. I think I agree with Bonfas, right? Polls are really a snapshot of opinion at a particular time. And particularly in relation to Dr. Otiso's question, right? Will Raila pay for his abandonment of his role of the opposition? I think a lot of this really depends on the largest coefficient, right? The largest pool of the voting, which is really, you know, around Mount Kenya, right? How will they be motivated to come out and vote in 2022, especially if they don't have a major candidate on the ticket, and especially because of the years of the bastardization of the Odinga name in central Kenya. This is just a reality. It's they've used all kind of ethnofaulisms against his ethnicity coming from the Lake region. They've called him the worst names over the history. So how is it now that Uhuru Kenyatta now suddenly makes a devil an angel? I think this is a very big challenge. But tied to that, Professor Otenyo, would be this question of, will there be a motivation in Central Province for people to actually come out and vote and vote for Raila, right? Or will Central Kenya, which has traditionally had a very independent sort of swing, right? Like in 2002, they abandoned Uhuru Kenyatta and went for Kibaki, right? Might this be another sort of deja vu moment? I think I disagree with Bonfas a little bit in terms of the fact that presidential systems don't really have oppositions. Of course they do. We have a presidential system in the United States. We have a majority leader and a minority leader. We have the opposition, right? They're not the ruling party is not co-equally accountable with the opposition. This is why we have an opposition. Otherwise, Democrats would be Republicans and Republicans would be Democrats. It wouldn't mean anything, right? So the opposition has a role. And I think Bonfas is being a little disingenuous and covering from Raila Odinga there, because Raila is trying to eat his cake and have it. You can't be in government and then say you're not in government when there's problems, but then you are part of a handshake, right? Secondly, Professor Otenyo, we still don't know what was in that handshake. Raila has never come clearly to tell us what was decided, what was agreed. Nor has Uhuru Kenyatta, right? It's never been, it was a deal brokered in secrecy, right? Yet this is supposed to be a public, a public deal. This is very problematic, which then takes me back to my original conception that Raila Odinga is a very transactional leader. He will do anything to win power, which is in and of itself not necessarily bad, but let's just admit and be honest, these people are about winning elections. And if Raila Odinga tomorrow had to join with, with whoever else it was, he will do it to gain power. And then lastly, Professor Otenyo, I really think as Kenyans and as KESA, we really need to start thinking about what do we do or how do we create a space for the loser of an election? As Bonfas, Professor Owinga had mentioned earlier, Raila Odinga was not in government. So he was making trouble on the streets, which is why his supporters were being shot. Right. So how do we allow major political players take the exit ramp graciously and harmoniously without upstaging or turning the apple cart upside down, which is what Raila did in 2017, right? How do we allow them to have this gracious off-ramp, right? Set up a presidential library, become, we need to give them a role, because in this coming election, they both can't win. Ruto and Odinga can't both win. Raila might lose the election, Ruto might lose the election, but what will they then be doing? Because they will not have an official government function when they lose the election as a candidate. Will they be on the streets saying, no Raila, no peace, or no Ruto, no peace? So Professor Otenyo, I think this is really something we really need to interrogate as Kenyans. What do we do with the losers of these elections? And either we create norms where it's accepted that if you lose an election, you graciously go home and allow the next person to try again, right? Because this idea that you have to try 20 times to become president, that running for president really becomes your full-time job, is problematic because it never solves issues.
I think that's what my point. My point was that Raila Odinga was not an opposition leader. Officially, if you would not call him an opposition leader, he was outside parliament. So what could he do in terms of calling him an opposition leader? So my point is that he made the handshake he was not an opposition leader, he was not in parliament. That's just what people assume. But even Mudavadi could have been referred to as opposition leader. Yeah. So in my view, I think that if we want to create a different system where the loser then is referred to as an opposition leader to play that role, then we could do that. But as we speak now, we do not have that kind of position in parliament. Yeah. We assume that legislators hold the government accountable. And so the debt burden that we have today, all of them have to be accountable to. That the debt burden that we have today was created by committees in parliament and with the Jubilee administration, and they need to address it.
Thank you, panelists. I'll take two questions from the floor, and then we'll have the closing remarks from the panelists. There's one hand that is up. I'm not sure whose hand that is.
Eric, that's my hand.
Oh, sure. Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
I don't have a question, but I wanted first of all to congratulate the panelists for the information they have shared with us. But I just want to make a statement that unlike what Monda is trying to, the picture is painting, I just want to support what Dr. Owinga is saying. Raila Odinga has never been in the opposition. He has never been an official leader of the opposition. He wasn't in parliament. So the handshake in which he participated in was just to bring peace. So any analysis of his role in working with the president should be seen in that light. I think that's a fair way of analyzing the situation in which Raila and Uhuru came together. And then anything else could be outside of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we hear from Professor Nasongo? He makes a comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, panelists and Professor Otenyo for facilitating this. Mine again is not necessarily a question. I'm sorry I came in late because I mistook the timing. I thought it was 8 p.m. Central Time. Yeah. I want to disagree again with Professor Choti and Dr. Owinga. The idea that Raila Odinga was not opposition leader, I think here there is a very problematic thing, and it is by design on the part of the Kenyan politicians. You have political parties that have a chairman and a party leader. What the difference there is between a party leader and a chairman is not what has been explained very well. So in parliament, you had the ruling party as Jubilee, and you had ODM as the opposition party within parliament. The leader of ODM is Odinga. He may not be in parliament, but he controls his parliamentarians as members of the ODM. So technically, Raila Odinga was the opposition leader. President Uhuru Kenyatta was the leader of Jubilee Party. Anytime there was something going on, Raila Odinga will mobilize his members of parliament in parliament to do whatever it is he wanted. So Raila Odinga was, for all practical purposes, an opposition leader. Why did Uhuru not then shake hands with the chairman of ODM and not Raila? Thank you.
Owinga.
Okay, can I comment?
Sure.
I think that is an assumption that Dr. Nasongo is making. I think officially, you would not make, there was a chairman of ODM in parliament. Raila was outside parliament. If that conundrum needs to be corrected, then it should be constitutionally corrected so that we can officially refer to someone in that position as opposition leader, as Uhuru Kenyatta was during the time that he was referred to as opposition leader, with an office and security and salary as an opposition leader. So the assumption that Raila always has to be an opposition leader and doing the handshake kill the opposition, I don't think anybody's assigned the position of opposition leader in Kenya. Political parties are created to win and exercise power.
I think there is a misunderstanding here. The idea is not that we are saying Raila Odinga must be in the opposition. His party ran for political office. His party lost the presidency. His party was the second most significant in membership in parliament. So in parliament, you have Jubilee members of parliament, you have ODM members of parliament. The Jubilee members of parliament are in government, on the government side. ODM members of parliament are on the opposition side. If things were supposed to be right, ideally, the chairman of the ODM party in parliament was the official opposition. But I think this is where we are talking about how confused the system is. And I think that is where you are also making an erroneous conclusion that we don't have official opposition in Kenya because of a presidential system. It is not. This has to do with the new constitution that is still being implemented. Because originally under the previous republic, the leader of the majority party in parliament, the president, the leader of the minority party is the official opposition. That is where Uhuru Kenyatta found himself after 2007 elections. But here we are still implementing this constitution, and this is where this confusion is coming in. But the confusion is also compounded by our politicians who want to remain in a particular position. I have never understood why they have designed their political parties in such a way as their structures provide for a party leader and then a chairman. What is that? It doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, the person who is actually in control of the party is the party leader.
Thank you.
So unless that is done away with, we will continue to have this confusion. But as for all practical purposes, after the elections of 2017, Raila Odinga was the leader of the opposition.
So Dr. Nasongo, how do you play the leader opposition if you are not supported anyway? Do you use your personal funds to organize meetings and play this role for the country?
Political parties receive financing from the exchequer.
Yes, but is it stipulated that this is what should be used, paid to the opposition leader, or like you call him, Raila Odinga?
So
how do you transact business if you are outside parliament?
Are you begging the reality of being an opposition leader on the issue of being paid?
I'm saying, how do you transact business as that kind of leader if you're outside parliament?
The same way Raila was transacting with Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yeah, Professor
when Uhuru Kenyatta wanted anything, he will go to Raila to mobilize his members of parliament to support the policies they are making.
Yeah, Professor
Uhuru will never go to the chairman of ODM. He will go to Raila because Raila was in charge.
Yeah, Professor Nasongo, Professor Owinga, could I jump in real quick? Bonfas, I think so. There's the letter of the law, Bonfas, which you're correct. He's not Raila is not a de jure opposition figure. We do not have that provision in a classic parliamentary system. Correct. Very well said. Or in a semi-presidential system, right, with a prime minister and a president, a dual executive. But I think as what Professor Nasongo is alluding to, we know the context of a political culture and the history of institutions. And we know ODM is Raila Odinga and Raila Odinga is ODM. You will not get the nomination for president of ODM if you are not Raila Odinga. So I think we really need to be honest about these situations, that 2017, Raila was controlling ODM. The chairman of ODM is powerless aside from Raila Odinga, because that's Raila's party. That's Raila's party. So if you're going to say, Raila didn't have an official title, so he had no influence in government, I think it's being a little disingenuous.
I think what we should agree on is that
he controls the party.
We should agree on that the constitution is not clear on this, and you cannot voluntarily transact the leadership of position from your personal funds.
All right, so I'll let Philip intervene since he's not a political scientist. All these guys are political scientists, and you can pardon them for.
Thank you. Yeah. I can see why we have a misunderstanding, misconception, and misinformed information, because I've been commenting for a long time. I lived whereby when I was 12, 14, there was no police force in a country. There was no police force, was only for European to lock us up. But after independence, we turned to be our own enemy. There was no government. I'm 71 years old today. I also lived to go to school with Uhuru when he was 19. I was an old man in the grad school at UMass, and he was in Amherst College. We were in a student association. He's a brilliant guy. But also, I was living when I met Odinga himself, the Raila Odinga at his new Stanley Hotel. We used to hang out there, drinking at Tuscus, and he was nothing. He has been reduced to nothing. So you guys need to start doing research. And the Justice Kahome did a great job to show that we don't have to translate history from foreigners. We got to dig our own. there's a traditional way of, and Kenyatta had it, whereby the traditional law was respected. But ideology and the theory, political theory, it's borrowed. And that's why it conflicts with our psyche and our psychological and philosophical dialogue. Now, the handshake. I am familiar with it. I'm a member of Global Peace Foundation. President Gerono there, we went to Uganda, 2017.
Korea and Uganda, we went to Korea and Uganda.
And the Korea, where the handshake had started 2009. And it was started with the North Korea, the South Korea. And then the first convention happened in a safari park. And they always did that every year with breakfast prayer. Now, that is where handshake came from. If you go to globalpeacefoundation.org, gpf.org, you will see Raila there, you see Kenyatta there, you don't see Ruto nowhere. you see Basanjo, you see Karume, you see the Rwanda president, what's her name, Kagame, and also Museveni gave him best incredible history without looking at paper. Now, this was lacking. Our institution. When I was in primary school, we knew how many ministers were there. We knew who was there. Who knew members of parliament? Because logical, remember logical? Most of you are not born by that time. But that's where we need to go back and look at history. It's still there. We have not lost the culture. Culture still exists. We just ignore it because we impugn. University system has not touched any iota of developing curriculum on civic education, literacy. Literacy is not about memorizing things. So the last thing, I just joined with the Global Peace Foundation and the Commission of Cohesion and Integration, and we are developing curriculum on civic education. It's never been done. It has never been done. Lumumba, he tried, but it's never been done. So us as academics, we need to get away from theoretical translation of conflicting, contradictory theories and the laws of the West and the East and whatever, and they start looking at us. We are the 48th county according to IBC. Nobody knows that because we don't think even it's possible. Now, we have a Kenya National Council of Elders members we created here as elders, and we have not communicated with the rest of you so you can embrace us and we can embrace you and create this is the 48th county. Translation of the Katiba 2010 has not been, it's just discussed by politics, like this forum like this. Then the confusion. So we need to start writing things down as academics and historians. Nasongo, you are very good. So I'm looking for about 5 people each to write the chapter for the next, and we have a discussion and not debate, dialogue, whereby you have a reflection and action, and then create, not to be transformative, to transform and our identity. Your children need to be able to understand what role did you play, and what consciousness did you leave here? What did you come here for? You didn't come here.
Philip.
Okay.
Thank you. So we are now at 7:05 Arizona time, which must be very late Eastern side. What I would like to do, if President Gerono Rotich allows me, is to have the 2 panelists take 2 minutes each to wrap up the session, to perhaps just tell us what their final thoughts are on the 2022 elections and the diaspora. And then I'll hand over to President Rotich. So David, do you want to go first or?
Yeah, sure. bwana mwenyekiti, dada mwenyekiti, naweza kufunga kwa Kiswahili? Naomba.
Sure.
Asante sana kunipa nafasi hii kuweza kuchangia kwa mada muhimu sana ya leo. Mimi kwa maoni yangu, ndugu na dada mwenyekiti, ni kwamba uchaguzi wa 2022 ni uchaguzi muhimu sana ambao utaweza kutabirika ya kwamba falsafa mpya ya Kenya kwa kweli itakuwa ni gani. Itakuwa ile falsafa au utamaduni wa kitambo wa mabwanyenye kujiingiza kwenye madaraka na kupora mali ya umma, au utakuwa ni nafsi mbadala ambao utaendeleza kudumisha, kuboresha misingi ya kidemokrasia. Kumalizia ni kusema hivi, mpira kwa kweli wakabumbu hudunda, lakini ndugu Otenyo, hautabiriki. Uchaguzi huu huenda ukadunda upande wa Ruto au upande wa Raila Odinga. Lazima tuhakikisha kwamba miundombinu ya kisheria na kikatiba ipo thabiti, na sisi wana diaspora tuna nafsi muhimu kuchangia mada hii. Asanteni.
Asante sana, Professor.
Okay, I think I would say in my closing remarks that I think this election, as Professor Monda said, is a very consequential election for the people of Kenya. And I think we should take this election very seriously, because it's a transitional election that is going to usher in a new government. So for me, I think everybody should try to engage with this process, try to understand what is going on, try to be informed about the different positions of the different coalitions and what they stand for the country, because the elections are happening at the backdrop of so many issues that I think need to be addressed. One of them being the economy and what is going on with our economy, and who is capable or who is ready to address these major issues in the country. I think the second issue is the issue of national unity. I think this need for the country to think about the future of other generations and who are the kind of leaders that we want to have in the country to make this country better than we found it. So I think this is a very important election. I think every citizen of Kenya must take it seriously, try to engage, get information, and also inform the others that are back home of the importance of voting. And I think at the end of it, this election will be determined by the turnout, who turns out to vote at the end of the day. So for me, elections matter, and there's no election that is not consequential to the lives of people of our country. And therefore, this is a very important election that we must engage with, and we must discuss this issue. And I want to thank KESA for organizing this first discussion where we actively engage in discussing issues that are happening back home. I think we should do this frequently so that we engage with our country. That is our country, and it's our business to engage with it. So thank you so much for organizing this, and I wish everybody all the best.
Thank you. I think it's now my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Rotich. And I would like to thank the panelists and everyone else who participated in this panel, and wish you a great evening. So asanteni.
Thank you so much, Dr. Senya.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, dada na ndugu mwenyekiti. Nimeshukuru sana. Asante sana kwa wananchi wote waliopo hapa.
Thank you so much to our great panelists. Thank you to our moderator, Professor Otenyo. Thank you, our panelists, Professor Monda, Professor Bonfas, Owinga. And I really want to thank you, because I called you, I called you and you agreed, and we have this rolling. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the information that we have gathered. I have learned so much personally. I'm not a politician, so this was a lot of good information. I took a lot of notes. So thank you so much. I also want to thank everyone who made time. It's a Thursday evening. Thank you for participating. I want to thank our leaders. I think the other members that I did not recognize were here today. We have our student representative, Sylvester, and there's also another student, Jimmy. I know you asked a question, but we were not able to address all of them. Sylvester, he works very diligently and makes sure that our students are engaged. Sylvester, are you still here? I just want to see your face so they know. Sylvester Makobi.
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Yes.
Thank you for the session.
Yes.
Hello, Sylvester.
Hello.
Yeah. So Sylvester is a PhD student at Bloomington, Indiana, Bloomington, and he represents our students on the board. We also have Professor Abala, who is a chief editor for the KSR Journal. If you've not submitted, she does an amazing job with reviewing, and I think they're in the process of finalizing. Prof, are you here, Professor Abala? I know you have a special edition on politics that is coming up. Professor Abala, you want to tell us a little bit about that? Professor Kimosov, that is the associate editor. Maybe she left, okay. If she's not here, we have a journal. So again, thank you everybody, this has been great. As Professor said, we will continue to have this monthly session. So if you're interested in presenting a topic in April, please reach out to me or the secretary. We'll get together, we'll put together a panel, we'll put together, so pick a topic, get your panelists, and we'll get this rolling. We'd like to have this continue. We'll probably have a session in April. May, it's a busy time, and June, we are off. July, most of us will be traveling. In August, and then we'll see all of you in September in Dallas. So thank you, everybody. It's happy hour. Let's engage. We can hang out a little bit. I have my popcorn ready if anybody wants to have some.